Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the China Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. Beijing and Washington hold a call to discuss bilateral trade and economic ties as issues from soybean orders to computer chips remain problematic despite the trade truce in October. China's He Lifeng holds dialogue with Trump officials Besant and Greer. China warns Japan against reviving militarism as Tokyo boosts defense spending, eyes missile exports. China condemns Japan's Prime Minister for suggesting possible military action over Taiwan, accusing Tokyo of reviving dangerous militarism. White House releases a national security blueprint marking a sweeping assertion of U.S. influence in the Americas. The framework pledges to prevent non-Western powers from expanding their foothold across the Western Hemisphere. Dutch minister admits being blindsided by China's retaliation in Xperia chip crisis. Karaman's faces criticism after Beijing choked off chip flows and scrutiny of his move to invoke a Cold War-era security law. China's officials say the country will work with the United States on salient global narcotics issues based on the principles of equality and mutual respect. Adds authorities on both sides are implementing a consensus reached between China-US leaders in Busan in South Korea. China says that China deploys the warships in military operations, but Beijing neither confirmed nor denied the maneuvers. Taiwan urged China to exercise restraint. Taiwan to ban access to the Chinese social media platform Red Note, known as Xiaohongshu in Chinese, for 1 year, citing security risks. The announcement triggered protest from the island's largest opposition party that called it an act of censorship. The U.S. Supreme Court agrees to hear a case on whether some children born in the U.S. have a constitutional right to citizenship. In January, Donald Trump had signed an agreement order to end birthright citizenship for those born to parents who are in the country illegally, but the move was blocked by multiple lower courts. And viewers, let's start a China report with the top focus story. China's Vice Premier He Lifeng had held a constructive video call with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, focusing on bilateral trade ties. The discussions aimed to expand areas of cooperation and address existing challenges between the world's two largest economies. According to reports, both sides agreed to promote the stable development of bilateral trade and economic ties and expand the list for cooperation and shorten the list of problems. This call comes after the meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. counterpart Donald Trump in South Korea last October paused tariffs and export controls. The two countries have reached a 1-year tariff truce and a pause on export control. However, many details, including the sale of the U.S. operations of social video app TikTok, soybean purchases and chip sales to China, remain undisclosed. And Dr. Tomohiko Taniguchi, who is a former advisor to the late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, joins us live from Tokyo. I thank you for joining us here at NewsX World and appreciate you giving us your time. I'd like to first take your comment on the discussions that were held. Do you think that the talks are likely to help China against the U.S. sanctions?
Basically, it is going to do no harm to anyone else, including Japan, India, and the like. Some sort of settlement has to be forged between the United States and China. In addition, there has been, one can assume, a mounting pressure from US-based interest groups, such as soybean exporters, And before Xi and Trump are going to meet in person next year, 2026, those areas have to be covered well by the two government officials. And that's exactly what took place yesterday over the phone calls. Yes.
Are there any imminent sanctions still looming over China as far as the US is concerned?
One of the focal points is NVIDIA, the most advanced designer and manufacturer of AI chips. And NVIDIA, its CEO, is interested in selling those high-end semiconductors to everyone, to the United States, to China. But it's an area that a lot of people have been very much nervous looking at, because the next competition between the two economies and among many countries would be on the supremacy of semiconductor manufacturing for the artificial intelligence.
All right. I thank you for your comment there. And with that, I also request you to stay on as we move on. Viewers, China has also sharply criticized Japan after Tokyo approved a supplementary budget that pushes its total defense spending to roughly $71 billion for fiscal year 2025, reaching its goal of allocating 2% of GDP to defense earlier than planned. Beijing also reacted to reports that Japan is in talks with the Philippines to export its Type 03 medium-range surface-to-air missile system. Chinese Defense Ministry spokesperson Zhang Bing accused Japan of repeatedly violating the spirit of its pacifist constitution, expanding its military capabilities and moving toward the export of lethal weapons. Zhang warned that Japan's actions risk reviving what he called militarism and urged Tokyo to honor its obligations as a defeated nation after World War II. He added that Japan must stop undermining regional stability, saying that if it continues on what he described as the wrong path, it will face the judgment of history and justice. And I would now request Dr. Taniguchi to join us back in the discussions here. Dr. Taniguchi, where is this path between China and Japan headed towards?
Xi Jinping, the nation's top leader, seems to have spent a lot of time arguing that Japan making a vicious sort of thing to undermine the international order when he spoke with the US President Donald Trump. So, from the very top to the very bottom, the Chinese now are speaking in one voice. The spokesperson you have just cited is just a spokesperson for not the state itself, but for the military. So it is not an authoritative sort of statement, but the content that you have cited is exactly the same as everyone else says. So they are actually making utmost attempt to call something white, something black. So that's exactly what China is doing now.
And how do you respond to China's criticism on Japan approving the supplementary budget?
I think it's common knowledge that many Western nations, including NATO member nations, are aiming at even higher, 2.5% as opposed to GDP. And Japan is just aiming at 2%. And I, for one, think that Japan should spend even more to the extent that it would be sufficient for Japan to give protection to its own territory, water, airspace, and the like.
But would you like to speak on the fact that this is also coming after Takaichi's position on Taiwan that's obviously concerning China?
The legislative bill has passed the Diet Parliament and made into law many years ago under the previous Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in which it stipulates that in the case of contingencies very much pertinent to Japan's own security, and when the allied force, namely the United States, has been involved, Japan is going to consider helping to work together with the United States military as a collective unit. So that's what Takaichi, Prime Minister Takaichi mentioned. She doesn't say anything that Japanese are going to be automatically involved in case of Taiwan contingency when the Chinese assaulted Taiwan militarily.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Taniguchi, for speaking to us here at Newsx World and helping us with more perspective on that. And viewers, we now move on to news coming in from the United States. The White House has unveiled a national security strategy that signals a broad reassertion of U.S. influence in Latin America. The plan commits to blocking non-Western powers from deepening their reach in the Western Hemisphere, a point seen as directly aimed at China's expanding role in the region. The U.S. strategic parlance refers the Western Hemisphere broadly to Latin America, a geopolitical space long regarded as a place where U.S. has sway over. Now, this belief marks back to the Monroe Doctrine, a 19th century policy that warned European powers against meddling in the newly independent nations of Latin America. However, the involvement of U.S. in Latin America throughout the 20th century has established the doctrine in the Western Hemisphere as per the interests of the U.S. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump's administration is still updating the framework for a new era of great power competition. All right, and with me in this discussion is Satoru Nagao, who is a fellow at the Hudson Institute, joins us live from Tokyo. Thank you, Mr. Nagao, for joining us once again here at Newsx World and speaking to us this morning here in India. How do you see Trump's posturing with his latest national security blueprint as far as Latin America is concerned and the China question?
This strategy is based on the recent military budget fact in this case, because according to the CIPRI, the think tank in Sweden, they calculate the military expenditure of the countries. In this case, from 2011 to 2020, the one decade, China increased their military expenditure 76%. But during the same period, the U.S. declined 10% of their military expenditure. So that's why even if the U.S. spends 3 times bigger military expenditure, compared with the past, China is catching up. So view from the United States, they need to find a strategy to identify how to use the military expenditure effectively. In this case, firstly, the priority for the United States is American continent. So especially under the Trump administration, from Greenland to the Panama to the Latin America, all of the American continent is interest of the United States first. And it is true that China is expanding influence in this region. So that's why firstly they're focusing on this region. But at the same time, in each region, outside of the American continent, so how to do that is a matter. And in this case, indeed, traditional offshore balancing type idea is coming. What is offshore balancing idea? Simply said, regional country take charge first. After that, if they need, finally U.S. reinforcement will come. In my opinion, this is a Hollywood-style military intervention. Hollywood style is what is because the Hollywood movie, most of the times in the main actor, main hero need to fight. When the final scene, the reinforcement come and this was a clear victory in the movie. But so who gets the most important interest in this most beneficial actor in this movie is of course reinforcement. So that's why the battle has happened in Europe, in Middle East, or Indo-Pacific. So every time regional country fight as a hero, but finally the decisive victory caused by the reinforcement will come. That time U.S. will come. And when we check the U.S. military intervention in the World War I, World War II, indeed, this is the pattern. This Hollywood style is the pattern. So that's why every time the regional country fight, after that, finally U.S. come and get the victory. That is my pattern. So that's why U.S. return to the traditional pattern of the military intervention. And so U.S. will take care of the many regions at the same time, but final scene they will come, not just the beginning. But that is maybe a strategy and way how to use the military expenditure effectively, I think.
And Mr. Nagao, how do you react to the White House describing the Western Hemisphere as America's homeland security zone?
Yeah, America is, of course, this is a very important area for the United States, understandable, because for India, the South Asia is most important area because of geographical close proximity. For Japan, the Northeast Asia is important. For Australia, the South Pacific and Australia, Oceania region is important because geographical distance. So for Europe and Europe, Middle East, Middle East. So that's why this is understandable. But at the same time, view from what happened in the past, that time the US is superpower and everything the US can deal with. View from that time, the US need to use their resources effectively. This means that the influence of the US is a little bit declining. And of course, still the U.S. is most important country to secure the world order. But at the same time, effective use of resources needed means that the U.S. faces a problem now.
And would you say that U.S. is taking a rather hegemonistic approach in the entire Americas, both continents included? And can it really prevent China from moving in this area if it so wishes to?
Indeed, the traditional U.S. policy towards the American continent is a little bit hawkish. So compared with U.S. policy in the other region, their policy is a little bit U.S. is master, do not resist us, something like that. So that's why it is understandable. This Trump administration policy is quite traditional U.S. policy in the American continent. Of course, previous presidents did not say the Greenland is part of U.S., Panama should be, or just Venezuela shouldn't resist. This kind of thing is more moderate what they used in the past. But anyway, the policy itself hasn't changed. The U.S. policy towards the American continent is relatively strong and hawkish. And because the United States think this is the area of the United States, U.S. interest, and compared with other region, this is priority. So that's why U.S. intervened this region, China intervened this region. Of course, this is provocative. When the Soviets set up missile in Cuba, that is too provocative. So that's why in the American continent, U.S. interest is completely different, and U.S. think this is one kind of invasion if the outside great power intervenes the area of the American continent.
All right. Thank you for speaking to us and being us on your opinions on that. With that, viewers, we now shift our focus and move on to some more news. The Dutch Economy Minister, Vincent Kiermans, is now under fire after admitting that he did not expect China's strong reaction in the Nexperia chip dispute. This came after the Netherlands used an old security law to stop Nexperia's Chinese owners from shifting production out of Europe, and China blocked the export of chips from one of the company's major plants. This caused shortages and disrupted global car makers. Opposition leaders say that the Dutch move was rushed and poorly planned, and that the government failed to consult the parliament. the European Union, or the industry. Meanwhile, the minister defended his decision, noting that there were serious concerns about technology being moved out of Europe, although he admitted some parts of the process could have been handled better. The conflict has disrupted the global automotive supply chain, affecting major car makers like BMW and Volkswagen, and has become a key flashpoint in the broader tech rivalry between the West and China. And now moving on, viewers, China is also saying that it will continue working with the United States on major global narcotics issues, emphasizing that the cooperation must be based on equality and mutual respect. The statement came from the Ministry of Public Security after a media inquiry about the status of bilateral drug control efforts. According to the spokesperson, both countries have been actively implementing the consensus reached between their presidents during talks in Busan. Officials say cooperation so far has produced what they call significant results. Cross-departmental drug control teams from both sides remain in frequent contact, and a recent video conference allowed them to share updates and outline new priorities for future collaboration. Beijing stresses that sustained communication is essential as both nations confront evolving narcotics challenges. And that's a wrap on the China Report. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates from across the world.